Hey everyone, so what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at how we inspect some of our climbing gear. Obviously there's quite a lot of different types of climbing gear, so we're going to break it down into a few different videos. So today's video we're going to look at Carabiners and Quickdraws and Belay Devices, and basically what we're looking at is how long they last, how to inspect them to make sure they're still safe, and any things we need to think about for maintenance or storage. We'll start with a straightforward normal carabiner. The lifespan on metal climbing gear is pretty much indefinite. There's not a recommended retirement age for this stuff. It really comes down to sort of how much you're using it. So what we're going to do is we're going to check our carabiner and see if there's any damage to it. So we're looking all around the carabiner and we're inspecting it to see if there's any cracks in the metal, which would obviously be bad. Also, what can happen is you can end up with sharp little edges or burrs where it's rubbed against a rock, or particularly the carabiners that get clipped into things like bolts. If you then end up taking a lob on the bolt, you can find that you can end up putting a sharp little nick sometimes in your carabiner. So we want to watch out for those. Check there's none of those. Sharp bits on the carabiner might not directly affect its strength, but if you then run a rope through that or you clip a sling to it, you could then be damaging other parts of your climbing system. So that's why those are bad. If you do find a little sharp nick, assuming it's quite small, you can get a very fine file and just file it down a little bit. If there's a substantial chunk out of it, then you probably want to think about retiring it. So we're going to have a look at that. We're also going to have a look for any signs of corrosion to the metal. What you can find is certain carabiners can end up going kind of flaky almost. They end up degrading. So there's an example here on this one, and you can see that the metal is corroded and is almost flaking off in places. There's another example here on this carabiner. So this can happen for a few reasons, but essentially if it's starting to do that, it's bad news. It's time for that to retire that carabiner. So yeah, have a good look at those. Next, what we want to do is, having inspected all of the body, is to inspect the gate. We want to make sure that the mechanism itself there's no signs of any damage. In particular, the rivets at the bottom, or if it's a carabiner that's got rivets at the top as well, check those. Make sure there's no cracking on those, there's no signs of any damage, that they're all as they should be. Then we want to check the actual gate action, so make sure it opens and closes smoothly and there's no resistance there. The last thing we want is our carabiners getting stuck open because they don't close properly anymore. And it's worth checking the nose of the carabiner as well, because you can occasionally get some damage in there, and it's also such an important part of the carabiner that we want to make sure there's no damage in there. If it's a screw gate carabiner, again, check that it screws up and down nice and smoothly, there's no resistance there. The other thing we're looking out for on these is any signs of excessive wear. So over time, ropes can actually wear away the metal. Here's an example here. This is an old Belay carabiner, which now retired, but the top section here, there's a wear patch where the rope's been running through. It's actually almost created a little bit of an edge where it's rubbed against these ribs on the carabiner itself, which could be sharp. Generally, if there's signs of wear on that, if it's just a slight smoothening, maybe the anodizing's come off a little bit, that's probably okay. If it starts to actually be a significant amount of wear, check that there's no edge damage to it and check that it's not removed a significant amount of metal. So something like 1 millimeter removed would be too much. That means it's time to be retired. If the gate is sticky and you need to lubricate it, then my preference, or what I generally use, is some duck oil. So you need just a tiny amount, but and then work the gate a few times to let that lubricant move in a little bit. And it's important to wipe off any excess. We don't want any excess grease or oil or lubricant on our climbing gear. It could affect other parts of the system, or we just don't generally want grease on our hands when we're climbing. Now we're going to move on and we're going to inspect the Quickdraw. Obviously we inspect the Carabiners of the Quickdraw in the same way. It's also worth remembering to check in a Quickdraw, one end's typically quite fixed, so make sure you pull it around a little bit and check the area that's normally covered as well for any signs of damage. You want to pay particular close attention to it's normally the top carabiner and Quickdraws that takes the most wear. This is where we're clipping bolts, this is where we're clipping wires and things like that tend to wear the most on the metal. So this is often where we'll see the most wear on a Quickdraw. But once we've done our carabiners, like we talked about earlier, we're going to come down to inspecting the sling central section of the Quickdraw. Now these have got a shorter lifespan than the metal, and they often wear quicker. So these have got a recommended manufactured lifespan of around 10 years. If you're using them fairly regularly, then that lifespan can be a lot shorter, depending on how much you're using them. If you're using them once a month, it's going to be a bit shorter. If you're using them every single day, obviously, again, their lifespan is going to be a lot shorter. So we want to inspect the whole sling area for any damage, any kind of particular wear on the sling. We want to pay good attention to the stitching that's going through. We want to make sure there's no damage to any of that. And one of the most common things you'll see with Quickdraws is they can get a bit fuzzy. Now you might think that a bit of fuzziness on the sling isn't that big a deal, but what it is all of the fibers are woven in and out to create these, and each time there's a bit of fuzz, then obviously that strand of fiber is no longer doing its job. So if it becomes quite fuzzy, then a significant number of those strands are actually really not functioning anymore. I saw some tests where they tested some old fuzzy slings and things, and a sling which had been fuzzed up had around the same strength as a sling which had been cut halfway through. So it shows you how much difference just some fuzzing coming up is. Got some ones here which we've just recently retired, and they don't, from a distance, they probably don't look very fuzzy. So one of the things you might find helps is turning the sling part sideways. It makes it slightly easier to see all the little bits of fluff sticking out the sides. Have a good look all over it. If it is really fuzzy, then it's cheaper to buy a replacement little slings section here and just keep the same carabiners. If they're still in working order, then you don't have to buy a whole new Quickdraw. Next up, we're going to talk about inspecting Belay devices. Obviously there's loads of different Belay devices on the market, all very slightly different, but there are some key things that we're going to inspect on all of them really. Obviously we're going to look for any obvious signs of damage on the device itself, and similar to how we inspect the carabiners, we're going to look for any sharp edges. We're going to look where the rope runs and make sure there's no bits that are catching or things like that. Something like a straightforward Belay device like this, it's worth inspecting the retaining loop, just make sure there's no damage to that. The area that the carabiner typically rubs against when it's being used, have a good look at that area, because again that can wear. You can also just pick up little sharp edges when we've got it clipped to a harness and we're sort of scrabbling up a chimney or something like that. We're scraping on the rock quite a lot. And then check inside and check any sharp edges. So you can see this one is getting quite worn inside. This was all originally blue with the anodizing, and that's been worn off where the ropes have run through these grooves. So you can just really feel in there with the fingers, check that there's no sharp edges at all where any of that's been running. It's similar to the carabiners, when a significant amount of metal has been worn through those grooves, it's gonna be less holding power, and it's just not going to be as safe, so it'd be well worth getting a replacement. Other Belay devices you might have, so this is a Click Up Plus. Again, we're going to look all around it for any signs of wear. Try and run our finger along as much of the area that the rope runs as possible, feeling for any sharp or rough patches. And just give it a really thorough look over, look at it from every angle you can think of. If this one's got rivets holding it together, so again we're going to inspect those quite closely. Something like a gree-gree, we can open it up, and again where the rope runs we're going to check that there's no sharp edges. Also check for rust. I've seen some gree-grees which haven't been used for quite a while sometimes build up just a little bit of rust internally on some of these camming sections. I'm going to check that that's got a nice smooth action. Also the section here on the bodywork where the rope's going to run over, again we want to make sure there's no sharp edges. Be very careful if you do need to put any lubricant on these, because obviously the last thing we're going to want is lubricant where the rope itself is actually running, and make sure you do wipe off all excesses from that. It really comes down to just looking very carefully at the gear, feeling it all over, looking for rough patches, any signs of wear, any corrosion to any of the metal or damage to any of the rivets within the device. And basically if you're not sure, then it's time to get a new one. If there's any doubt in your mind, then it's time to retire it. The last thing you want to be doing is be way up on a climb and sort of thinking, oh, I wonder if that Carabiner's safe, or I wonder if my Quickdraw's too old, or something like that. You don't want those things playing on your mind, and at the end of the day when your life is involved, it's just not worth the risk. Either get somebody more experienced or an instructor to maybe have a look at it, or just go and buy a new one. Everyone loves buying new climbing kit, so it's a good excuse to get a nice shiny upgrade. Hope you found that useful. If you do have any questions, then leave us a comment and we'll do our best to get through all of those. And yeah, check out our other videos coming up. We're going to look at ropes, harnesses and all the other bits that you have on your climbing gear. Thanks for watching. Give us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next one.